Biennials, as most of us know, are these large format exhibitions that happen not in a single museum building or a gallery, but they tend to take on the entire urban scape of a city, the urban fabric as its site. And in doing so, they often have this imagination which is not restricted to the city, but is often at minimum regional, but most often global, and thus become a project where the world is almost invited to arrive into a city. And through this, I think the city then generates, through what one might say twin properties of periodicity and place, a single location but multiple times through which the editions return, a certain kind of a narrative and a relationship between the audiences and the biennial, wherein the biennial itself becomes like a fold-away deliberative assembly or an intellectual or artistic infrastructure that artists, curators, various participants would arrive in and kind of cross-pollinate each other's imagination. And the cast of all of this really falls on the entire city, where essentially in its best form, the biennial becomes a kind of site through which one can hope that there's a kind of, one might say, an upregulation of the civic discourse of the very town within which the biennial takes place. Because the biennial then generates its own imagery, its own keywords, its own stories within this audience. And I think that remains, a fundamental part of the biennials, that it can really take art to the people at a certain scale. Biennials are a form of exhibition making that one could say in the last couple of decades have really seen an almost viral proliferation across the world. Even 2 decades ago, there were just a handful of biennials around the world. And right now, there are over 300 biennials around the world. So if we just do the maths, one could say that every other day there's some biennial opening or closing in some part of the world. And this creates this kind of bewildering imagery in our heads of the sheer volumes of people that almost circumnavigate the globe following the itinerary of the biennials. And I think that's created its own kind of artward circulation of a scale that was almost unfathomable a couple of decades earlier. The question about all of these, in fact, seems sort of heightened at a moment like this, when all of us speak through these kind of virtual channels in our own individual self-isolation. And biennials become peculiar things to investigate at this moment in time, because biennials are essentially instruments of social cohesion. They are about people, and they are about gatherings of people. So it feels kind of odd to sit in isolation and talk about biennials, because they are exactly the opposite of what's happening at this moment. And that also, of course, raises the question about the relevance and validity of biennials. But I would often say that when we really ask the questions about whether biennials should happen at all, or are biennials still valid, and all of that, I think there are these fundamental questions. What, how, who, what is it for, who makes them, when is it made, where is it made, and how is it made. I think if some of these questions are addressed, and if one, through these investigations, arrive at a reasonably valid set of reasons, I think then they become valuable to really think of the relevance of the biennials in those particular places. An example is really the case of Kochi in our own country, where 750,000 people come to see the biennial and participate in it, sometimes making multiple visits. And really this has transformed the site of Kochi. And it's a place where there's really no other cultural or artistic infrastructure of this scale. And so the biennial becomes almost like a project that arrives every 2 years, but it transforms the fabric enough that there are multiple artistic projects that continue because of the presence of the Kochi Biennial. So I think there are various parts of the world where the Biennial plays a very, very significant role. Biennials, as I was just saying, are essentially about being located in place and time. And the internet is fundamentally about the non-local. If anything, the internet is nowhere and everywhere at the same time. And I think its sheer virtuality is its power. Biennials are about locatedness. It's about a location through which you kind of mine and understand the world. I wouldn't simply kind of graft the project of the biennial onto the internet. I think it would be kind of counter to the project of the biennial, and in fact counter to the project of the internet as well. That said, in these unforeseen circumstances that we see ourselves, there were several biennials that have opened in the last 3 months, and several of them had to shut doors prematurely. In those circumstances, those biennials have opened a portal to the world to come and visit the biennial virtually. And I think that's a very valid thing to do.